Welcome to It's Not You, It's Grief, a safe space to have candid conversations surrounding the many faces of grief. How do you handle the process while moving forward and ultimately getting back to living in the moment? Come on this journey as we navigate grief through the art of storytelling. And now for your host, Ahira Smith. Go ahead. Welcome, everybody, to It's Not You, It's Grief podcast. My name is Ahira Smith. Thank you again so much for joining me on another special episode. I am here today with a very special guest. This is a woman who I had the pleasure of meeting recently, who actually, she responded to a message that I had sent her regarding the topic that we will be discussing. And let me just say, she resonated with it so much and we were able to connect. And now I brought her onto the show. And I'm just so pleased to have her here because she's going to be talking about a subject that hits close to home for a lot of people. And I really want to make sure that I send a friendly reminder that the information, the topic that we will be discussing is of a sensitive nature. And my special guest will be speaking from that of her professional setting, from that of a PhD candidate, if I'm not mistaken, as a clinical psychologist. And she's also going to be talking from the standpoint of her own personal experience with the subject matter at hand. So please be aware that this content that we will be discussing is not for young children at this time. This is definitely for mature audiences. There may be some discussion, some things that may trigger folks regarding the nature of it all. Please, if anything is resonating with you, I really would like to encourage you all to make sure that you are able to talk with somebody to seek professional assistance and support regarding what we're going to discuss. At this time, I would very much like to introduce you to a PhD candidate, Ms. Jennifer O'Neill. She has received her undergraduate degree in business administration from Empire State College, a SUNY school up in New York. And she also received her graduate degree in community counseling regarding University of Phoenix, if I'm not mistaken. She has worked as a trauma psychotherapist in a private group practice and correctional facilities with active and retired military and sexual assault survivors. She has also trained crisis advocates, attorneys, community organizations, and correctional officers on the impact of sexual trauma, domestic violence, and sex trafficking. As I mentioned before, she is a PhD clinical psychology candidate with a specialization in existential, humanistic, transpersonal psychology. She also happens to be a member of the Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, Omega Rho Zeta chapter, where she is currently the basilisk, a Southern Arizona YWCA board member, and on the advisory board for the Women's Business Center. Jennifer is also the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Restoration Empowerment Institute, an organization that provides training, consultation, advocacy, and support services towards recovery for families impacted by oppression, abuse, and violence. Jennifer is a local and international retreat facilitator, conference speaker, Beautiful Little Things LLC owner, and she's also a loving mom and a grandmother. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Miss Jennifer O'Neill. Hi, Sora.
Hi, Sora.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me on this. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just to let everybody know, this month, April, happens to be Sexual Assault Awareness Month, for those of you who may not have been known about this. And unfortunately, it happens more than we like to admit. And before Jennifer, before I have you come on and talk about what it is that you all do in terms of your practice, I just want to talk about some of the statistics I was able to find out recently, which was pretty startling. But you know what? I think we definitely need to have these conversations. We have to put it out there. Otherwise, people are going to continue to be in the dark, and we just can't have that. So just to let you guys know what I was able to find out in terms of sexual assault status, 1 out of 10 people who have been sexually assaulted have been raped were males. 1 out of 10 who have been raped are males. 1 out of 5 in the US have either experienced or attempted rape in their lifetime. 1 in 3 females have either experienced or have been, unfortunately, attempted rape between the ages of 11 and 17 years of age. Nearly 1 in 3 high school girls who've experienced sexual assault reported considering suicide. That's nearly a 60% increase from 2012. 21% of the transgender, genderqueer, gender nonconforming college students have reported experiencing sexual assault. 80,600 inmates experience sexual violence while in prison or in jail. And it's estimated that in 2018, 20,500 military personnel have experienced some type of sexual assault. We got to talk about this. This is startling. Even when I received this information just the other day, it's just frightening. And so, Jen, thanks again for coming on here to make this be a little bit more known, to put these conversations in the front and not on the back burner. So the floor is yours. I would love for you to just go ahead and say exactly what it is that you do, how long you have been working in this field, and we'll just take it from there.
Thank you. Yeah, the statistics are startling, and that's what's been reported, right? So that does not include, things that maybe families may want to keep quiet, or survivors don't want to share what has happened to them. So those statistics are just based on what is known and what's been reported. It is startling. When I started my career as a therapist, I started in the field immediately dealing with sexual assault survivors. Normally, I think when people first come into the field, they start with in agencies that maybe are dealing with some mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, things like that. And you kind of like build up to trauma, where in my case, I came into the field when I had to do an internship for school. And they say, I was told there's a huge waiting list. All of these people are waiting to be seen. They don't have enough clinicians. Just go over to this place. And I was like, I can't do that. I'm like, I can't do that. And they're like, they'll train you. And I went over there, and at this particular place, it was considered like the rape crisis center. And it was no fee for people to have services there at the time. And I was trained, and I noticed that I was really good at it, and being able to hold space for people who've been through such traumatic experiences. And I never stopped. So if anything, I've added on to it since I started, where I'm not just working with people who have either childhood sexual trauma or recent sexual trauma, but also I had started working then with people who have been traumatized, different types of trauma, whether it's within the military, working with officers that have experienced trauma, from working with people who've been victimized, right? So witnessing things while they're out in the field. So it has expanded since, where I've been just focusing on a lot of PTSD type symptoms.
So this is a tough topic, but we're gonna get through this. So you mentioned about the PTSD, which I'm so glad you brought up, because I was doing my own research. I've been listening to some people, and I heard that when it comes to grief, that the lines between grief and PTSD and depression, they're kind of within each other. If you would be so kind of break that down as far as from your professional viewpoint when it comes to grief, what that may look like versus that of a PTSD and depression, as well as how can you see how can you tell if it's one thing versus the other? Like, how can you tell if it's grief or if it's somebody who's going through a PTSD, or is it just depression? If you'd be so kind.
Yeah, I think one of the things, okay, so when someone would normally come in, I would give them like an assessment where they would self-report their symptoms. And what I've come to find out through just experience is that it looks different based on culture. And a lot of times, we'll have someone come in and they may report that they're having symptoms that look like depression, and maybe they'll be treated for that, or and sometimes the clinician completely misses the grief,
Mm.
Completely misses that the person is experiencing grief and loss, and or they're coming in, they're being treated for depression and grief. It is possible that many times people are misdiagnosed. And the thing about PTSD is that sometimes you can experience that, and it's based on the perception of what has happened. So you may not have actually gone through been like a direct, what's the word I'm looking for? It may not have directly impacted you, but you have seen it impact the people around you and still have symptoms of PTSD, or still be qualified for that diagnosis because of the impact of even what you've witnessed. So there's a whole criteria that we use when we are diagnosing someone with that particular diagnosis. But I think sometimes we can be almost misdiagnosed based on culture as well. I'm in Arizona, so there's not a lot of people of color or Black therapists, Black doctors that are available. So a lot of times when we show up in an office or in an agency, and we have historical trauma on top of that, it sometimes we can look like, oh, everything's fine. We're showing up, but we're showing up, especially Black women, showing up like, oh yeah, this really bad thing happened, I'm okay, kind of presentation. And we're not okay, right? And sometimes it's missed. So it's complicated if you don't know how to approach things from a cultural standpoint.
Okay. And I'm so glad that you brought that up as far as it being a cultural, that there's a cultural influence in terms of how we are looking at this heinous act of violence, because that's what it is. That's what it is. It's an act of violence. I wonder, because of the pandemic that we are still kind of navigating our way through, do you feel that with all of the attention that's coming on, or that's focused on mental health, that more people who have survived such an act are becoming more vocal to talk about this? Do you feel what may have happened 5 years ago, here's the pandemic, it was 5 years ago, it was suppressed, here's the pandemic, and then you were sitting in it and it just erupted. Do you feel that there's been an uptake as far as people becoming more vocal, getting the help that they need, mental health, and like, oh, by the way, 5 years ago, this happened to me at my job, or this happened to me and I got a ride. You know, do you see that happen? Do you see more people becoming aware and speaking about this?
I do. I see that it's been an increase. I mean, I've had many clients come to session and say, you know, it's because the Me Too movement that I was able to, you know, vocalize what happened to me, you know. So I think us being kind of grounded in place, and then having access to looking at social media, seeing people share their stories. You know, there was an increase of domestic violence during the pandemic, right? So just hearing these stories now, as people are sitting still, I think is giving others courage to come forward and share their story. So I think that, you know, in my observation is that people are saying, oh, it's kind of almost being normalized to share the story, that they're feeling like, oh, I can say this, it's not just me. You know, so, and then what I also witnessed from the pandemic is this increase of different movements, different programs that have come up. One in particular that I do a lot of, I receive a lot of clients through, is the Loveland Foundation. And you know, I believe that when they came out, it was maybe the year before the pandemic. But then they really, you know, a lot of people started to access their services after that. And so you see a lot of different programs that kind of emerged around that time because people had time to say, I need to do something. Right? I need to do something, or I don't want to just go to work every day. I feel like I want to give back. And they started holding groups and book clubs. And so I think that there was this huge, like, this huge emergence of being able to connect in a human way.
You know, one thing that has been on my radar this past couple of weeks, and I'm not sure if you've heard of it or not. There's been a lot of talk on social media about an infamous gathering that took place in the 90s called Freaknik. And I never participated. Let me put it out there, ladies and gentlemen. I never participated in Freaknik. When it happened, I was in school. I was a good girl. I had to get my education on. In fact, when it started, I wasn't even in college. I was in middle school. I was a baby. But there's been a lot of talk about this video that's supposed to be circulated. It's supposed to be released next year, in 2024, as the 30th anniversary of the infamous Freaknik. And I am aware that what had taken place was not kosher. I am aware that there has been some traumatic events that have taken place. And I kind of wonder, for those who are so adamant about shutting it down, because I'm hearing people are talking about putting lawsuits out there to not get this put out there because they're professionals, and a lot of stuff that went down was not all good fun. I'm wondering if this is going to be an onset of triggers for those who have been able to put it out of their mind, out of sight, out of mind, to now they're going to revisit this. And I know some people are like, oh, well, they were young. This happened 30 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, but a lot of stuff that happened 30 years ago can still resurface. What are your thoughts about this documentary that's supposed to be showcasing the wildest party that was never talked about, called Freaknik? What are your thoughts about what this is about to do?
Well, you know what? I didn't, I saw this kind of circulating, and I was like, what are they talking about? I kind of felt like I was kind of checked out of it, and so I'm glad that you brought that up and some of the background of it. It will absolutely trigger people. Absolutely. Here's this thing, like they tell you all the time that what you do on social media, that it never really goes away, right? It doesn't go away, but then you also have people that, okay, back then they weren't doing it necessarily for social media, but things are being recorded. So I have worked with people who have been recorded while they're under the influence, that, they don't know they're being recorded. And then all of a sudden it's in circulating. And that includes when I've worked with teenagers, right? Where some of them have tried to take their lives because they were being recorded and didn't know, right?
Wow.
So absolutely, it's going to be really triggering for a lot of people. And, the other piece to that, my mother used to say to us when we were growing up is, what you do in the dark will soon come to light, like to be careful what you do. But when you're, young and not thinking like that, you think you're just having fun, and somebody is somewhere recording what you're doing, you're not thinking about 30 years from now, it's going to come back,
Yeah.
So.
That is, listen, no, that's so true, because, we see a lot of stuff out on social media, and it'll be like, man, I couldn't be a kid in this generation. There's just too many video cameras. And I know I have had several conversations. I was like, Lord, thank God we didn't have social media back in those days, because I know people who wouldn't have this, they wouldn't be doing this, they would be this. And now it's like it's like it's manifesting to where now it's popping up, and it's been it's circulating in terms of getting ready. And I'm like, oh my goodness, because I'm a Gen Xer. My generation, Gen X, that was our generation. And I'm sitting there just shaking my head. I said, it ain't got nothing to do with me. But I'm like, oh, this is about to be a fire. And I was sitting there thinking about that. I'm like, you have people who are doctors and lawyers and judges and executives and pastors and all of the, family people. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is about to be a domino effect here. And I appreciate you coming on here to talk about this, because I can just see that this is going to be an ongoing thing. People who were able to put it out of their mind or wasn't feeling comfortable to talk about what happened, now it's going to be brought up in so many different factors, from them dealing with it to their loved ones having to see it, to answering questions by their colleagues, to even having to explain it to their children who may be of age or not. It's trauma.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
about to be a traumatic event.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would think the best way to kind of, support your own self through it, is to, okay, I don't know what's recorded, what's not recorded. Let me get into some treatment so I could start working on this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be the best way to kind of, handle the impact that one might have, is let me get in there and do, because here's one thing too, the other thing is that and this is something my mother taught me as well. When you go back to those things that mama and grandmama taught you,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you can pull out a whole lot of pearls, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the thing about it is, she used to say, like, if you deal with your stuff, nobody can hold power over you.
Facts.
Right?
Facts.
So you get ahead of it. You deal with your own stuff. You might have to deal with some embarrassment,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody can hold power over you when you face your own stuff.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think part of that has a lot to do with the culture, especially for us as people of color. We didn't necessarily feel comfortable talking to other people outside of our circle or our family about what's happened. We don't even have these conversations in the family,
Right.
and also thinking about the generation. Nowadays, when I'm looking at the younger generation, they feel more comfortable of like, I need to get some help. They'll say it out loud. I need a therapist. I'm dealing with mental health issues, where my generation or baby boomers or silent generation be like, oh, go ahead with that. We take it to the Lord. We take it to church, leave it at the altar and keep going. But I'm like, it's still festering. It's still,
Right.
it's still embedded in you. So you got to deal with it. So, but yeah, I definitely wanted to get your opinion on that, because again, this is just the beginning of I could just see that this being a really fiery domino effect on what's about to happen with that circulation. And again, it could be the start of popping up other videos of girls gone wild and MTV spring break beach video. I'm just like, this is just, it's just opening up a can of worms. So but we'll get back to focusing again regarding the sexual assault. In your profession, one of the things I have heard is that they're trying to find ways to help the survivors deal with it without having to relive it, without having to relive the traumatic or events, or engage the narrative recounting those events. What are your thoughts about it? Because, as you said, your grandma and your mom's pearls of wisdom, you're like, if you deal with it now, if you get ahead of it, if you talk about it, then nobody has the power to talk about it, without your consent. So what are your thoughts about that?
So I kind of have mixed stances on that. So I am an EMDR therapist, which is eye movement into reprocessing and desensitization, right? So basically that is a form of exposure therapy. So a part of that is allowing the person to process what has happened to them by bringing it up. Now, there's different ways to approach that, because I also use narrative therapy, which is, again, talking about the narrative of what has happened to you. So everyone who has been sexually assaulted does not necessarily have the ability to put it into words for different reasons. Some people, based on even just where they are cognitively, may not be able to put into words what has happened to them. But one thing we do know is that the body never lies. The body keeps track of everything that has happened to you, whether you have the cognitive ability to vocalize what has happened to you or not. So through EMDR, while we are able to allow that person to tell that story as it comes up for them, some people may process it on a body level and not necessarily put the words to it, right? So that tells me that I can work with someone on a somatic or a body level to process trauma without them actually speaking the words, right? So going back to, and this is me just pulling from like what works, right? What works is culturally, what are some of the things that people have done throughout the generations and generations that have helped them deal with trauma that they did not necessarily speak all the words of what has happened to them. So if we just look at our culture has used movement, has used music, has used songs, poetry, hip hop, all kind of different genres to process and metabolize what has happened to them. So I'll use whatever it is that that person connects to. They don't necessarily have to go through all the details of the trauma, but they can still process it. It's about moving it out of the body, right? So while I think I don't think it's absolutely necessary for you to recount the entire story of what has happened. I think it is important to know a person's narrative, because a lot of times if we connect to the narrative will drive how you the meaning that you give to what has happened to you. For instance, if a person, their narrative is, this is my fault, I need to know that you think that is your fault, so we can start taking that narrative apart and replacing it with, no, it's not my fault. It doesn't matter where I was, what I was wearing, no one has a right to violate my body, right? So knowing those narratives that a person has and how they connected it to their core beliefs, then we can see how do we dismantle that and put up and talk about what is the real truth of the matter, right? So there's certain things that we do want to know, but in order for a person to heal, they can use different avenues to move that trauma out of their body without going through every single detail.
Gotcha. Okay. So to kind of follow up with this, and I was listening to what you shared about the body remembers, even if you don't have the words, the body always remember. In your years in this field, I'm sure you might have encountered some people who have been accused of sexual assault, but it did not happen. For whether they were found innocent or it was, how has that been in terms of helping that individual process that type of trauma, being accused of such a heinous act? Because it's one thing to be in it as a survivor. It's another to be falsely accused, because it does happen. Let's just be honest, it does happen. Have you experienced those types of encounters? What have you seen from your perspective when you're seeing somebody recant as to them being falsely accused to where they're, from where they're moving on from that? What is that like?
So I have come across those cases, and I can't say that it's a lot. I have come across a few. Usually when I've worked on the other side with a person who's been accused of that, they have been found guilty of that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But there are a couple of cases where that has not been the case. The person did not engage in that. And in those cases, there was something that happened with a child, and the child recounted a story that they found was inaccurate. And that and this is the piece that this is when I go in and I work with attorneys and law enforcement to kind of talk about the way the memory kind of stores when someone has been traumatized. I talk about it like a shattering glass, right? The glass shatters, the pieces go everywhere. And to ask someone, especially a child, to put the pieces back together, some pieces are going to be out of place. It won't make sense. It doesn't mean that something didn't happen. It just doesn't, it may not have happened the way they remember it.
Okay.
Right. So in both cases where that I'm thinking of, where someone was falsely accused, something happened. It just didn't happen with them.
Okay. Okay.
Right. It didn't happen with them. So the person remembering where they had the pieces out of place. Now, the person being accused is a devastating experience for them. Because people are now looking at you, whether you're proven innocent or proven guilty, or people are now looking at you suspect, like, how could you do this,
Right.
So they have to then deal with how do I move on with this? They have to deal with the shame that goes with it, right? And a huge part of dealing with when people have experienced these traumatic experiences is shame, right? I mean, I could stay on months working with someone dealing just with shame, because shame becomes like a prison to the person, right? So for someone who has been falsely accused, a lot of times we'll work on shame and we'll work on anger,
which are components of grief.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Grieving to the loss of how they are perceived in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Those hidden losses.
Yeah. I might have been perceived as, this upstanding person that people look up to. And now people are looking at me always wondering, right? So this is that kind of loss of position too, and so and this anger of how could, even if they intellectually understand that this person is made a mistake, that they weren't trying to ruin their lives, but it's that anger of, I can't believe this is happening, and how am I going to live past this?
Yeah, that's pretty hard regardless of on who's on either side of it. It's hard. That's hard, and even I'm sure it's for you to even hear it on a consistent basis. That's got to be tough itself. What is the best way to circle back to that particular moment, especially for those who are surviving it or who've gone through it? What's the best way to circle back to that time at a later date in order to help the person process what has all taken place? What's the best way, do you feel?
So circle back in terms of like, okay, it happened 10 years ago, and now I'm going to go back into, okay, it's just about going and saying, I'm going to do this. Here's the thing, is that it is actually harder to suppress and move on, or try to move on, than actually dealing with it. Right. Because just because it's not in the forefront of your mind doesn't mean it's not manifesting in your everyday life.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it could be manifesting in your relationships with your significant other, the way that you raise your children, the way that you see and interact with the world, the way that you deal with the person on your job that reminds you of the person who was the perpetrator. So these things are going to be coming up in your everyday life, even though you feel like, oh, it doesn't bother me, right? Because I'll get that a lot, like, oh, I moved on from that. I'm not thinking about that. Okay. But then you see the string of these relationships that have nothing but mistrust and anger and this kind of lashing out, or being with people who consistently try to take away the person's agency. So you see all these different things that show that again, your body is having very clear memories of what's going on and responding to that unresolved trauma.
Gotcha. Wow. That's pretty deep. That's pretty deep. So because of the amount of work that you do with sexual assault survivors, what type of self-care tactics, methods do you follow? Because just me listening to you and just working with other people, I know for me it's heavy. It's heavy on a professional level, it's heavy on a personal level, because I'm an empath, so I'm feeling all of that type of energy. What type of self-care, how do you establish, I guess, maybe boundaries in terms of working with them and still maintaining some type of, I don't want to say, I don't know, sanity, or just how do you protect yourself from that?
Well, when I first started, it was really difficult for
Okay.
me, right? I would kind of be like looking over my shoulder. I couldn't date anybody for a while when I first started, because it was always this thing like, sexual assault doesn't have a face, right? You can't say that this is the scary person. The person who is the perpetrator doesn't show up with the horns on his head and a sign on their chest.
Right.
So in the beginning, it was really hard for me to even, wonder, like, I wonder what that person did, or I wonder if they've ever done that, So that it was really hard for me in the beginning to leave things in the office, right? And not think about it when I come home. And so I had to get a lot of supervision around that, and of how to deal with that. And then have conversations with people who have been in the field for a really long time about how can you do this work for this length of time, And so they would talk to me about, my expectations. So this has completely informed the way I practice. Is one, you mentioned before when you were reading my bio, the existential, humanistic, transpersonal part, right? And it's this understanding that I am not the expert in anybody's life. I don't own anything. I am a person who shares in this experience in their healing experience, but they are the ones that do the work. They are the expert in their own life. And if they have kept themselves alive all of these years, they can keep keeping themselves alive, and I don't have to save anybody.
Understood.
Right. So what my position is when I am invited into someone's life is to be there, and I describe it as the person like the Harriet Tubman with the lantern.
Gotcha.
But they have to do their own running. They have to cross that lake by themselves.
Right.
Right. But I can show you, because I've been along this route so many times, I can show you with my light, right? And when you want to avoid things, I can point to it and say, what's that over there? So you can look at it. But they're doing their own work. They're saving themselves, right? So that is how I start off. I come and I show up from that position, right? Which makes it easier for me to be able to say when they walk out the door that
Mhm.
this person has the capability to take care of themselves, right?
Gotcha. Mhm.
Then I have my own rituals, right? So my own rituals when I have sat through something that is, and I've heard all kinds of stories you can believe, but when it's, really difficult what I hear, I use the same thing I teach them is what I do. So I may close my door and I'll shake my whole body out, right?
Mm.
And I'm going to use movement to shake that stuff out where I'm externalizing that. So I may sit with them, hold the space, they do the work. When they leave, they take it with them, and I shake that stuff out of my body. I may go wash my hands with water and I'm washing that stuff. I may wash my face. Those are things that because this is for me is a very spiritual work,
Mm. Okay.
so I'll do those things. In the morning, I'm getting up, I'm dealing with my own stuff. So my stuff doesn't flow into their stuff, right?
Mm.
So it's all of these different things that I put in place to make sure that when I come, it is about them and it's not about me trying to mesh with them.
Understood. Understood. Jen, I appreciate you so much for taking time to really talk about this from your professional point of view, because this is a conversation that again we need to have in the forefront, and we shouldn't. It's not even getting talked about in the house, let alone out in a platform like this. So I do appreciate it. I kind of want to take it to a different direction, if I may. I know that you had told me in the beginning how you got into this. You noticed that there was a need to have somebody on this side of the spectrum to help those um, who have unfortunately been a part of a sexual assault situation. I get it from the professional standpoint. Personally, though, to me, it's heavy. Personally, why?
I have just like many other women have experienced sexual assault myself,
Mm.
right? So having gone through it myself when I was a teenager,
Mm.
and it's like, who do you talk to? Who do you go to? And I remember just kind of like telling friends or whatever what happened. But between that, having experience of being sexually assaulted, and then having multiple people use power and control with me and within relationships, so dealing with what goes with domestic violence. So having all of that experience is like, well, what do you do with all of this? Is this what it means to be a woman? That you're
Mm.
going to be like victimized every time you turn around? So it was really hard to deal with. So I dealt with it as much as I could spiritually, right?
Mhm.
I remember going to a pastor that it wasn't my pastor, but someone that did counseling for the first time when I was like in my 20s, and telling him like just a little tiny snippet of what had happened to me. And he was like mortified. And his response made me completely shut down. So it would have been years after that that I would take to go back to it again, you know. And when I finally did and addressed it and was able to have some healing, but it was only then that I realized that I had experienced PTSD as well.
Mhm.
Up until then, I didn't know what it was. All I know is that, if I heard something, saw something that reminded me of the person, I would break out in this cold sweat. I would have like what felt like a panic attack, and
Mm.
I didn't know what it was.
So
So it was years before I figured it out.
wow. So can you Again, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Mhm.
It's just disturbing, especially the fact that you took your story to somebody in the church. You told this pastor about what happened, and his response was not what you were looking for. And because of that, that even kind of made you shut down to where you don't want to ever talk about it again. So I'm glad that there was something inside of you, your faith, believe a higher being to make you be like, okay, let's talk about this again. It might not have been with that person. Lesson learned. We still need you to heal. We still need you to talk about this and share your story. Uh, can you recall when you were having those moments of the anxiety and the panic attack? Can you recall any triggers that that you felt was associated with your grief in terms of sexual assault? Like, what type of triggers were you experiencing when you were thinking grief wise?
Grief wise, I think just that feeling of I don't think I'll ever be safe anywhere,
Mm,
you know. I
mm-hmm,
don't think so. That feeling when you know you can move around the world and feel like nobody's gonna bother you, like
mm-hmm,
it's almost like this innocence of I'm okay, everything's good.
mm-hmm,
And that was gone, you know,
mm,
that was gone. So um it was grieving that sense of I can take care of myself.
mm-hmm,
I can be okay,
mm-hmm,
so I think there was a lot of that when it came to grief. Um, to me, it was, because in my situation, there was stalking involved,
oh
and I
wow.
had been stalked a few times by different men.
Mm,
And so I never felt safe.
oh wow.
I never felt safe. So to where you feel like you kind of want to become invisible,
Mm-hmm,
and that is a whole nother thing, because just having just being a Black woman in America,
mm-hmm,
you experience invisibility, just based on your various intersections. So having that reality, and then also having the reality of the men that showed up in my life were unsafe.
mm.
So it's like, is there a place for me anywhere?
That's tough. That's tough. And like you said, for us women in a man's world, it's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, it's this is deep. This is really deep. And I'm trying to make sure I hold my composure, because all I want to do right now is give you a hug.
Mhm.
And like, I'm with you, sis. I am. Um, what type of hidden losses? You mentioned about not feeling safe, but what type of hidden losses did you feel, or do you still feel or encounter that have taken place since episodes of of whether it's a sexual assault or domestic violence? I mean, we talked about the sense of safety. Do you feel like there's any other hidden losses that you might have had, like trust, or what other losses do you feel that has happened since then?
Well, I've done a lot of work on this area, right? Um, but one of the things I kind of briefly mentioned before that was like a hidden loss for me was relationships.
Yeah.
So it was this idea of, oh, I want somebody in my life, but I'm not going to let them get too close,
Mm,
right?
mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm.
in order for you to have a healthy relationship with someone, it has to be a certain level of vulnerability,
Right.
right? And, um, you know, that was one of the things that I had to absolutely deal with in my own therapy, in my own treatment, is that piece, the vulnerability, and being able to be authentic,
Mhm.
and so that you can have healthy relationships. But that was something that was a major, major thing for me, because I would say, oh, yes, I want somebody here. But then they would get a little close and I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you here? What, what do you want?
Right, right, right.
You know,
They're like, stay in your corner there. I see
right,
you. I see
right.
you. Yeah, I get it.
So
I
that
get
was
it.
definitely, and it took me a while to work through that. It took me a while to work through that, especially after I got in the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you start hearing all these horrific stories, and it's like, well, I know, everyone is not a predator,
Right,
I
right.
know that,
Mm-hmm.
but that was definitely one of those hidden losses. Is it was the loss of being able to have relationships because of that trust. And then I just made myself super, super busy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Getting this certification and that
Mm-hmm.
certification and, all these different things. So I wouldn't have to deal with, I wouldn't have to face that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So really, I just got like 2 or 3 more questions. And again, I appreciate you sharing your story, Soror. I really do. Relationships. Obviously, we focus on feeling connection. As a mom and a grandmother, was that challenging as far as to building a relationship, connections with your children and your grandchildren because of what happened? Was that
Mm,
challenging for you to establish that? Because with relationships, obviously, it's built with trust.
mhm.
Did you feel that the type of relationships that you were looking at, whether it was with partners or friends, you felt like your guard was up and even trying to solidify or strengthen that bond between your children and your grandchildren?
Mm. So, when it comes to building relationships with non-romantic partners,
Mhm.
I did not have a problem with that.
Okay.
Um, I did have a problem with, and this is years ago, with touch. I didn't
Okay.
like to be
Okay.
touched. I didn't
Okay.
like people to hug me,
Mm-hmm.
like, and so thank God, like there was someone who came into my life that helped me move through that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, eh, but back then I did not like to be touched at all. I didn't want to be hugged. So, when I became a mom, you got to be able to, I don't want my children to grow up and not receive physical affection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, that was something that was worked on very early on.
Okay.
So that is not an issue now. But I am absolutely, I've worked with other people who've had that experience.
Wow. That's tough. That's
Mm-hmm.
tough when you are the matriarch of the family and you're trying to make sure that you are in protective mode and loving mode and provider mode for the legacy that's coming behind you, but yet you still got this thing that impacted you before they came. That's, oh God, that's a lot. That's a lot. So with everything that's happened and what you've experienced, do you feel that, I don't want to necessarily say, do you feel like you've come full circle, but do you feel that your circle has just continued to evolve to where you're in a good place right now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Right.
good.
Absolutely. Um, for a long time, I couldn't watch shows that had violence against women. I still don't really do
Right,
that anyway, but
right.
um, those were some things that I would avoid back then.
Mm-hmm.
Now with like I said, with all the work that I've done, and just knowing that, just because you do work doesn't mean you don't have to go back and do more,
Right.
as things move on, but just knowing that, with all the work that I've done over the years, I can teach people how to work through those same things. I have very healthy relationships now, and can move from a place of healing, right? So it's not me being wounded, wounded healer, you know. So I can actually help and work with people from a place of healing. And I think it's important, because I don't think that we're supposed to stay in a position of being the wounded healer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. I agree with you. That's the thing about this platform and what this charge has been placed on my heart about grief. It is part of the process in terms of life's journey, but that doesn't mean that we have to be stagnant or stay in a state of fear of moving forward. We can still move forward with it and get back to living in the present moment. And as you said, just got to continue to do the work. It doesn't stop after 6 months or a year or 5. It's still an ongoing process when it comes to healing, because there's always going to be that trigger. There's always going to be something that's going to come up for you that will impact you in a manner that may take you back there. But with all the work that you've done and things that you have in place, and more importantly, your support system that's helped you over the years, and even those you've worked with, that's a support system in itself, because I'm sure that has helped you through your healing as well. But just the amount of work and connections you've made helping others get to where they're able to live a better tomorrow than they did the day before. So Sora, thank you. Thank you so much. I am so honored that you shared this with me and shared it on my platform. I really do. I'm trying not to get choked up, because it's deep. It's deep. We gotta talk about it though, because it's important. This is not only affects you as a person, as a professional, as a survivor, it affects those that you love and those relationships you want to build. So it affects each and every one of us. Again, the statistics are out there, and again, that's just those who reported it. Right. We're not even talking about the ones that haven't reported it. So with that, I just want to give you this opportunity. Share any last words of wisdom regarding Sexual Assault Awareness Month, or even just that of people who may be listening who haven't felt comfortable to share their experience. Like, what would you like to say to those who are listening, or even those who might know somebody who has been on that receiving end? What would you like to say?
Yeah, I think one of the things I would say to the supporters, right, the supporters of someone who's going through sexual assault, is that oftentimes we know that the sexual assault itself is traumatic, but I've had clients actually be more traumatized based on the reactions of their loved ones.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we are trying to support someone who has experienced sexual assault, we have to make sure that we're not doing victim blaming type of thing. Like, well, what did you do? That kind of thing. Well, why didn't you report that? Right. If you don't know what to say, that's another one of those pearls that come from grandma, right? When you don't know what to say, maybe just don't say anything.
Shut up.
Just
shut
be
up.
quiet,
Just
right?
Just get you some apple juice or something. Don't even look at them. Just look at YouTube or something.
Right.
Fix a bridge.
Just have a seat. Sometimes what people need is for you to just sit down next to them and just let them know you're there.
Right. Absolutely.
Sometimes that's more healing than any words you could say. But just go and sit with the person.
I agree, because sometimes people be like, oh, well, at least anytime somebody says at least, that's not comforting at all. I'm like, what? I'm going to need you to sip on your sippy cup. Don't say nothing. Here's another cup. just
Right.
just drink your Kool-Aid. Please leave me. So
No
that's
silver linings. That's
no.
where we go. Like, don't do the silver lining thing. Well, at least you have this,
Mm-mm.
or at least you're still alive,
It,
right?
it ain't, it's not silver. It's
Right.
not silver.
Yes.
It's a line, but it's not even silver.
Right.
So I appreciate that. And that's definitely a great pearls of wisdom from your grandmother and your mom.
Mhm.
So Soror, really quick before I let you go, please tell my people what events you may have coming up. Again, I know you're out there in Arizona on the West Coast Pacific time, but what upcoming events you have, speaking engagements. This is your time. Please share with us so we can support you.
Thank you. So, a more recent event that's coming up is, like you mentioned, I'm the chapter president of Omega Rosetta, and yay, where the leaders reside.
Yes, yes, but
So,
that's a whole nother
yes,
topic.
so, but we are hosting a BIPOC maternal health forum, and we are doing it with our D9 sisters. So we're coming together and doing that. And, it is a national crisis for Black and Brown women, but the numbers are much higher for Black women that are dying during childbirth. And the thing that's supposed to be so natural for us, right? And but yet the numbers are so high. So that's something that's going on. I'll be speaking at that event on birth trauma and connecting that also to the trauma when someone who has been sexually assaulted or experienced domestic violence, how or whatever type of violence. So that could also include racism and all of that too, right? How that impacts the birth process, how it can be traumatic. So I'm going to be presenting on that at that event on April 29th. It's going to be held at the YWCA of Southern Arizona in Tucson from 10 to 2, and it's a free event. So I'll be speaking there. Also, I am hosting a retreat for mothers and children, and it's looking at strengthening connections and deepening connections and strengthening bonds. And that's going to be in Belize.
Oh,
And
passport,
yes,
passport.
yes.
Where's my passport? Where's my passport? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I got it.
Oh,
I
come
got it.
on,
Passport.
Soror.
Passport. Catch
Uh-huh.
flights. Catch flights. Catch
Yes.
flights. Not feelings.
Okay. Yes. Yes, we will be in Belize, and that's going to be in the end of June. And
Okay.
that information is on my website. And my website is mysoultherapy.org.
Okay. Awesome. And what are the dates for that?
That is June 28th. I think it's June 28th to July 1st, I believe. I don't have it in front of me, but that particular event, we are teaching a lot of different skills. I'm co-hosting that event also with Dr. Rhonda Coleman, who is a Black acupuncturist / everything that she can be fabulous for, she's doing, right? So we're doing that event together, teaching moms and children how to strengthen bonds, helping them learn grounding techniques before they start school, emotional regulation. So we're going to be doing all of that through movement, art, looking at also some natural things like herbs, things like that children and moms can take to kind of calm the nervous system. So we're going to be doing that. And I have another event, another retreat in August that will be posted soon on the website. So I believe we're going to either do that in Bali or in Costa Rica. And that one is just my women, just no kids. Yes. Come on, Sora, come through.
Catch flights.
Yes.
Catch flights, folks.
Yes.
Catch flights, not feelings.
August, and that'll be just women. That's my journey to self-love retreat. So we'll be doing that soon. So all of those things you can find on my website, mysoultherapy.org. And I update it quite often so people can go on and see, or at least subscribe so you can get that information emailed to you.
Absolutely. And I tell you what, I will definitely have that information on my podcast episode description as well. So I'll have all that information. So in case you people couldn't write it down fast enough, she said she's going to Belize and talking about Bali and a girls trip only.
Yes,
So
girls trip only.
girls trip
Yes.
only. Sorry, fellas.
Mhm.
Sorry, kids.
Yes.
But you know, it's about healing. It's about healing, and
Mhm.
it's about moving forward with our daily activities, one breath at a time. So again, Soror, thank you so much for joining me. Everybody, thank you for listening. You know what? Because this is April. It's sexual assault awareness month. Let me say that. And this is something that isn't a month situation. This is something that's going on every single day, every 2 minutes. Another woman, unfortunately, is being sexually assaulted. I can tell you right now that I'm going to probably have a continuation of this topic the next Sunday. After this, I'm going to bring another special guest on here to continue to talk about this, because there are many ways for us to heal. And we need to have these conversations more in the forefront. So I'm definitely going to, this can't be a one and done type situation. We got to keep this conversation going here. So this Sunday and the next Sunday, we're gonna continue this conversation with another special guest. But Soror O'Neill, thank you so much again for joining me. Everybody who's listening on this podcast, thank you so much. Please look at the description for more information on attending soon to be Dr. Jennifer O'Neill's upcoming retreat. Any information you would like about sexual assault support systems, I will have that information on my podcast description. Everybody have a blessed Sunday. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening, being intentional, and sharing this moment with us. We at It's Not You, It's Grief deeply understand the many facets of grieving, and we want to make sure we can be here for you. Again, thank you for listening, and tune in again wherever you subscribe to podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time. Be well.